calendar said September 30th, but in Oak Haven, Illinois, it was already the night of October 31st. Evelyn Reed, a historian who dealt exclusively in tangible facts and verifiable dates, drove her beaten-up hatchback through a town that was actively challenging her entire professional existence. Oak Haven was not dressed for Halloween, it was dressed as Halloween. Every porch sagged under the weight of 20-foot inflatable ghosts, every tree was wrapped in miles of synthetic cobwebs, and every window glowed with the menacing, familiar grin of jack-o'-lanterns. It wasn't festive, it was compulsive. It was overwhelming, and it was 2 weeks premature by any normal standard. She parked in front of the Hawthorne House, a secluded Victorian relic that sat on the edge of town, ringed by a dying orchard. The house itself looked less like a home and more like an architectural manifestation of a nervous breakdown. Ornate, peeling paint, and a widow's walk that stared out at the dark treeline with perpetual anxiety. Evelyn inherited it from a great-aunt she didn't know existed, a distant branch of her family tree that had apparently failed to thrive. She was here only to catalog the contents, sell the property, and get back to the clean, rational reality of Chicago. She found the key not in a realtor's lockbox, but tied to an object resting on the dusty front porch swing. A small antique iron bell, cold and heavy, engraved with a single looping symbol that resembled a Mobius strip swallowing itself. The house deed, tucked into the swing's cushion, was bound by a piece of coarse, yellow thread. Inside the envelope, resting atop the official paperwork, was a small hand-stitched pamphlet made of stiff parchment. It was titled, in painstakingly clean, embroidered script, The Hallow Bound Edict. Evelyn, accustomed to dusty historical texts and footnotes, frowned. This wasn't a diary or a will, it was a set of rules. She opened the pamphlet. The text, stitched in thick black thread, was unnervingly precise. The festival must commence. On the first day of the 10th month, the town must be fully yielded to the spirit of the harvest. No light shall shine except that which is sanctioned. 2. The lamp must burn. The pumpkin lamp of the Hawthorne House shall be carved at sundown and must burn continuously until the great extinguishment. To quench its flame is to invite the great tally. 3. The offering is due. All accounts must be settled before the final hour of the night. The balance is not negotiable. The great tally? Evelyn murmured, pushing the heavy front door open. The air inside was still and cold, smelling of dry dust, aged wood, and an unsettlingly sharp scent of cinnamon and old iron. She made her way through the ground floor, noting the meticulously clean dust covers over every piece of antique furniture. This wasn't a neglected house, it was a preserved one. The living room was dominated by a colossal 4-foot-tall pumpkin carved with an ornate, strangely mournful face. It sat unlit in the center of the mantelpiece. She checked her phone. 6 p.m. Sundown. As if a switch had been thrown, 100 distant porch lights clicked off across Oak Haven, replaced instantly by the flickering, sinister orange glow of carved lanterns. The sheer immediacy of the transition was chilling. The sound of a match striking echoed in the silent house. Evelyn spun around. There was no one there. But the giant pumpkin on the mantelpiece now held a candle, its flame already burning, perfectly still. Evelyn looked down at the edict in her hand, then back at the impossible, self-igniting flame. The second rule had just been fulfilled, not by her but by the house itself. She went to the mantel and stared at the pumpkin. Its carved face, which had seemed merely mournful before, now appeared to hold an active, silent dread. The flame inside burned with an unnaturally steady, cold light, casting dancing shadows that resembled grasping hands against the walls. Evelyn Reed was a skeptic. But the rules of Oak Haven, she realized, were not suggestions. They were a pact, and she had just inherited the responsibility for its adherence. Evelyn didn't sleep. She spent the night watching the uncanny light of the great pumpkin lamp, the rules of the edict printed on her mind. When dawn finally broke, it did so reluctantly, a pale, anemic light struggling against the perpetual gloom of the town's decor. Stepping outside, she saw that the town had changed again. It wasn't just the decorations, it was the atmosphere. The town was alive with manic preparation. At the corner market, 3 elderly men were carefully applying layers of theatrical grime to the store windows, making them look centuries older than they were. The cheerful welcome to Oak Haven sign was now draped in thick, synthetic moss and a banner reading, "The season of the soul is upon us." Evelyn drove toward the town hall, needing access to official records. The drive was a disturbing immersion into a ritualistic performance. Every single house was a meticulously crafted set piece. The children running along the sidewalks weren't wearing costumes. They were wearing uniforms. Every child in a specific block had the same simple ghost sheet or black cat ears, and they moved with unnerving, measured steps. She encountered her first town resident at the small stone building labeled Oak Haven Historical Archive. Elias, the archivist, looked to be in his early 20s, but his face carried the hollowed-out exhaustion of a man who hadn't rested in decades. He was meticulously alphabetizing a shelf of old census records, wearing a vest and tie that seemed several sizes too large. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice soft, almost a whisper, as if afraid of disturbing the pervasive stillness. "Evelyn Reed, Hawthorne House," she introduced herself, holding up the deed. "I need access to the pre-1930 town records and possibly some genealogical files on the Hawthorne family." Elias froze, the census book slipping slightly in his hand. The name Hawthorne clearly carried weight here. "Ah, the new warden," Elias murmured, quickly correcting himself with a shake of his head. "I mean the new owner. Welcome to the season. Everything is available, but the older files are difficult to access. We're very busy." He seemed genuinely terrified, not of Evelyn but of his surroundings. His eyes darted nervously to the archive's windows, which were already obscured by a dense spray of decorative spider egg sacs. "Busy with what?" Evelyn pressed. "It's September. The town looks like it's preparing for the end of the world." Elias offered a thin, mechanical smile. "It's a long tradition, Miss Reed. The season must be perfect. It brings in the tourists, ensures our prosperity. We simply give our full attention to the aesthetics." He sounded exactly like Sheriff Taggart from her old nightmare town, reciting a carefully rehearsed script. Later that afternoon, seeking a break from the archive's oppressive quiet, Evelyn sought out the only other name she knew, Mrs. Thorne, listed in the deed papers as the executor of her great-aunt's estate. Mrs. Thorne lived in a pristine colonial house, the most restrained in Oak Haven, yet still adorned with a perfectly symmetrical row of 40 identical jack-o'-lanterns. The elderly woman invited Evelyn inside for tea. The interior was spotless, smelling overwhelmingly of cinnamon and potpourri. Mrs. Thorne was deceptively sweet, her movements slow and deliberate, but her gaze was relentless, like a watchful insect. "Your Aunt Clara Hawthorne was very traditional, dear," Mrs. Thorne said, pouring tea. "She kept the pact well. She understood that the little things are the big things." "The Hallow Bound Edict," Evelyn said, placing the pamphlet on the table. Mrs. Thorne's smile didn't waver, but her eyes hardened. "A private family ritual. It ensures the safety of the house. You must follow the rules, Evelyn. Especially the first one. Never extinguish the pumpkin light after sunset. That light is what keeps the town's prosperity flowing." The conversation was a masterclass in evasion, delivered with a polite, unnerving insistence. Mrs. Thorne subtly reinforced the town's control, linking the fate of the Hawthorne House directly to the obedience of the edict. Evelyn left the meeting with the sinking realization that Mrs. Thorne wasn't just an executor. She was a gatekeeper, ensuring the town's collective, terrifying performance continued without fail. Evelyn returned to the Hawthorne House as dusk began to settle again. The giant pumpkin on the mantelpiece was burning its steady, cold flame. Evelyn looked at the edict. The first test was obvious. If the town's prosperity hinged on a silly superstition, she, a historian of verifiable truth, was going to verify its falsity. She just had to find a way to break the first rule. Dusk brought the return of the profound silence and the aggressive orange glow to Oak Haven. Evelyn stood before the great pumpkin on the mantelpiece. Its candle flame, perfectly still, was the only true light in the room, reflecting eerily off the dust covers. To quench its flame is to invite the great tally. Evelyn had spent 2 hours in the basement, ignoring the smell of old iron, and returning with her weapon of choice, a battered, old-fashioned fireplace bellows. She wasn't going to rely on superstition. She was relying on fluid dynamics and basic physics. A historian's skepticism demanded empirical evidence. She calculated her approach, positioning herself 6 feet from the mantel. She aimed the bellows, took a deep breath, and squeezed the wooden handles with a defiant sense of scientific righteousness. A focused column of air shot toward the flame. The air struck the pumpkin's carved opening. The candle flame, impossibly, did not flicker. It did not bend. It did not even tremble. Instead, it suddenly contracted, shrinking into a single blinding pinprick of pure white heat at the center of the wick. The contraction was the prelude to the house's reaction. A wave of intense, localized cold hit Evelyn with the force of a blow. It was not the ambient chill of the house, it was absolute, negative heat, concentrated and specific. It slammed into her chest, stealing the air from her lungs. The blood beneath her skin felt instantly sluggish, thick and heavy. Evelyn stumbled back, dropping the bellows with a clatter that sounded deafening in the resulting stillness. The contraction of the flame was now an expansion. The pinprick of white heat exploded into a foot-high, jagged sheet of cold fire, burning intensely within the pumpkin shell. The color was wrong, a deep, unnatural violet orange that defied combustion chemistry. The smell of cinnamon and iron intensified, now acrid and burning. Evelyn felt an agonizing pressure build behind her eyes, a dizzying sense of disorientation as if the room had rotated on its axis. She gasped, fighting the sudden, overwhelming urge to simply lie down on the floor and succumb to the draining cold. She forced herself to look away from the lamp and towards the nearest window. The window pane, which had been clean, was now covered in a lattice of instantaneous hoarfrost. And through the thin, temporary gap in the frost, Evelyn saw it. It wasn't a monster or a ghost, but a flash of movement that defied geometry. A massive, black, segmented shadow, too fast and too angular to be any living thing, that seemed to consume the glow of the distant streetlights. It was gone instantly, pulled back by the contained fire of the pumpkin, leaving behind only the deep, unnatural etching of the frost on the glass. The cold slowly receded, leaving her shivering, her skin aching with the painful return of normal sensation. The pumpkin flame settled back down, still unnaturally large and steady, but returned to its original sinister orange. Evelyn stood there, heart hammering, clutching the cold iron bell she had instinctively picked up off the floor. The rules were not a superstition. The rules were a lock. And by attempting to quench the candle, she had not only rattled the cage of the entity known as the Carver, as Elias had hinted, she had momentarily opened the gate, allowing its pure, cold energy to leak into her reality. The skepticism was gone, replaced by a cold, empirical terror. Her task was no longer to prove the town wrong, but to figure out how to survive the Hallow Bound Pact she had unknowingly signed. The townspeople were not deluded fanatics. They were keepers of a terrible, necessary order. The morning after her confrontation with the cold fire, Evelyn returned to the Oakhaven Historical Archive, trading her terror for professional ruthlessness. Elias was nowhere to be seen, replaced by a woman whose enthusiasm for cataloging was unsettlingly intense. Evelyn, using her credentials, bypassed the new gatekeeper and headed straight for the microfiche machine, the single analog entry point into the town's past. The town's narrative, as presented in the official bound histories, was one of unblemished prosperity and a charming, sudden tradition of extreme Halloween decorating beginning around 1926. Evelyn was looking for the vanishing point, the moment the history was consciously broken. She loaded a reel marked Oakhaven Public Records, 1920 to 1930. She scrolled through the predictable minutiae, property taxes, school enrollment, advertisements for local corn syrup. Then the silence screamed at her. The year 1925 was marked by a chilling bureaucratic anomaly. Between October 28 and November 5, over a dozen families vanished from the records, not through natural attrition but through clean, clinical redactions. The property transfer files for the homes weren't properly notarized sales. They were listed as community reallocation, a term that sounded terrifyingly impersonal. The bank records showed their accounts closed, but the money hadn't been withdrawn. It had simply been dispersed to a ledger entry titled Oakhaven Civic Harmony Fund. A single grainy scan of a front-page article from a Chicago newspaper from 1926 confirmed her fear. Illinois town celebrates record harvest despite great relocation of residents. The article, clearly written by a journalist who was placated by civic leaders and good cider, painted the mass departure as a natural response to the post-war industrial boom elsewhere. But the most compelling evidence was the sheer volume of missing data. The tax records suddenly lacked entire streets, the town census dropped by 18% in 1 week, and the local school roster was reduced to half its size. There was no mention of the original, pre-1926 Harvest Festival, which Evelyn knew from generalized New England history would have been small and focused on Thanksgiving, not Halloween. She realized the extreme Halloween festival wasn't a tradition. It was a monument and a distraction. It was founded at the exact moment the original order was violently shattered. As her eyes ached from the microfiche glare, she stumbled upon a collection of historical architecture photos submitted for a 1922 county fair. One image was a crisp, clear photograph of the Hawthorne House. The house was visually identical to the one she inherited, except for the living room window. On the mantelpiece, where the colossal 4-foot pumpkin now perpetually burned, there was only a vase of dried flowers. The mantelpiece itself was slightly shorter, suggesting the current version had been raised to accommodate the pumpkin. Evelyn realized the Hawthorne House was not just a historical relic, it was a piece of contained infrastructure. The pumpkin was the central lock, the mandatory fire was the circuit, and her family, the Hawthornes, were the hereditary fuse that maintained the pact. She heard a faint shuffling noise behind the tall metal shelves. Elias. He wasn't working. He was standing motionless, watching her through the narrow gap between the stacks. His exhaustion was now tinged with genuine panic. He had seen what she was researching, and he knew she had found the vanishing point. Evelyn quickly printed the sparse, redacted records, careful not to look Elias directly in the eye, and quietly fled the archive, leaving the nervous archivist to guard the secrets she had already uncovered. She had the date of the town's founding atrocity, late October 1925. She now knew precisely when the pact was first made and what the town was covering up. Evelyn returned to the Hawthorne House, the thin stack of redacted town records feeling heavier than lead. The historical evidence had confirmed the impossible. The town of Oakhaven was built upon a deliberate mass disappearance, ritualistically papered over by the creation of the permanent Halloween festival. The house itself was the central hub of this horrific containment system. The key was now the basement. She needed to find the source of the old iron and cinnamon smell that saturated the house, particularly the lower levels, the core of the pact's infrastructure. The basement was a warren of stone and dirt floors, a chaotic contrast to the preserved elegance above. She moved past the wine cellar and the laundry chute, shining her flashlight beam over the cracked stone foundation. She was looking for structural anomalies, the hidden geometry that hinted at a reinforcement or an alteration. She found it tucked behind a wall of ancient, tightly stacked firewood that seemed too symmetrical to be random. Using the historian's curiosity that had replaced her fear, she began removing the wood piece by piece. Behind the stack was a section of the stone wall where the mortar was inexplicably new and the stones were rough-hewn, unlike the original smooth-cut foundation blocks. This was the hidden room. Using the long, thin iron bell, the key fob, as a probe, she searched the edges of the false wall until she found the weakness, a seam where the fresh mortar was thin. With a grunt, she pried at the stone, and a narrow section of the wall swung inward with a dry metallic grind, revealing a small, dark closet. The room was not a storage space. It was a perfectly preserved, airtight sanctuary. The air that rushed out hit her with the full force of the house's signature scents. The suffocating, cloying cinnamon, a traditional preservative masking decay, and the sharp, coppery cold iron, a historical ward against fey and elemental spirits. The room itself was lined with sheets of thin, tarnished iron, riveted into the stone. At the center of the iron-lined room, resting on a small stone pedestal, was a single object, a massive leather-bound volume, larger and heavier than her grandmother's edict pamphlet. This was the book Elias had feared, the artifact whose existence explained everything. Evelyn reached for it, her fingers brushing the stiff, cold leather. The cover was blank, save for the looping Mobius strip symbol stamped in black ink. As she lifted it, she heard a sound from the floor, a faint dry scraping noise like a nail dragging over stone. She shone her light down. The pedestal had been resting directly over a deliberate crack in the floor's stone. The crack was deep, long and oddly segmented, resembling a jagged, unnatural maw. The scraping noise was followed by a plume of air, not merely cold air, but air that radiated the absolute zero of the previous night's cold fire. The smell of ash and cold iron, the carver's signature, rushed out of the maw, briefly mingling with the cloying cinnamon. The house's mechanism was revealed. The Hawthorne House was a containment vessel, and the basement crack was the pressure relief valve leading directly to the carver's feeding ground. She had found the packed ledger. The book was cold, binding, and clearly waiting for her. Evelyn opened the ledger to the first page, using her flashlight to illuminate the archaic, tight script. The pages were filled not with financial transactions, but with names, ages, and a column of dense, complex astronomical calculations related to lunar phases and biomass potential. The first entry, dated October 29, 1925, read, "Asset transfer, complete. Harmony established. Season, perpetual. This was the town's truth. This was the record of the sacrifices. And as the new Hawthorne warden, her name, Evelyn Reed, was the first fresh line in the ledger's future. Evelyn knew the ledger was a death sentence, but it was also a weapon. It contained the terrible mathematical truth of Oakhaven. She couldn't decipher the astronomical calculations alone, but there was one person in town whose job it was to know its records intimately, and whose terror was genuine: Elias, the archivist. She found him late that evening, not at the archive, but in the town's small, immaculate cemetery, tending to a row of surprisingly new headstones. He was hunched over, brushing frost off the polished granite despite the mild air. Evelyn approached him silently, the massive ledger carried inside a canvas tote bag. "Elias," she said, her voice low. The name made him flinch violently, dropping his brush. "Miss Reed, you should not be out here. The curfew is approaching. Mrs. Thorne, she watches this place." Evelyn ignored the warning. She pulled the heavy leather volume from the bag and slammed it down onto a flat, marble slab near his feet. The metallic thwump echoed sharply in the quiet cemetery air, the weight of the book symbolic of the weight of the town's history. "I found the ledger, Elias. The real one. Not the curated fiction in your archives. Tell me about the asset transfers in 1925. Tell me about the Civic Harmony Fund. And tell me what asset the town uses to buy its prosperity." Elias's pale face went ashen, his eyes darting frantically between the book and the dark line of the woods. He looked ready to vomit. "You shouldn't have done that. You've brought its attention here. It knows." "It already knows," Evelyn corrected, gesturing to the thick, creeping hoarfrost now rapidly forming on the marble slab where the ledger rested. The cold from the carver was radiating through the book. "I tried to quench the flame. Now you tell me what the flame keeps locked away." Elias finally collapsed, sinking onto the damp ground, his meticulous appearance dissolving into fear. He whispered, his words tumbling out in a broken rush. "It's not a spirit, Miss Reed. Not a ghost. It's a primal hunger. It predates the town. It predates the idea of Oakhaven. Our ancestors called it the carver." He explained that the carver demanded an annual feeding, not of grain or cattle, but of concentrated life potential. The Halloween festival, the excessive preparation, it's all bait. The sheer volume of synthetic fear, the constant focus on death and decay throughout the month, builds a massive reservoir of negative psychic energy. It's like a battery. Elias pointed a trembling finger at the ledger. "The ledger isn't a death list, it's an account sheet. It tells the elders which individual, due to their youth, ambition, or connection, possesses the highest UV unit of vitality/potential. That energy, when harvested in a state of terror, is enough to satisfy the carver and guarantee Oakhaven's miraculous, unearned prosperity for another year." Elias revealed the deeper horror. The town's prosperity, the lush harvests, the beautiful homes, the stable economy, was all a direct product of the pact. Every perfect jack-o'-lantern and every happy tourist was fueled by the annual terror and demise of one person. "The Hawthorne House is the focusing lens," Elias continued, his voice barely audible. "The iron in the basement and the pumpkin lamp, they contain and focus the carver's influence to the Hawthorne orchard, ensuring it only takes what is offered. Your aunt, Clara Hawthorne, was the previous warden, responsible for maintaining the focus and recording the transfers. She kept the town safe by feeding the beast." Evelyn looked at the ledger, no longer seeing archaic script, but a list of sacrifices that stretched back centuries. She flipped to the current year, her breath catching in her throat. The entry was already half-written, only the name was missing, waiting to be filled in. "Who is the target this year, Elias?" Evelyn demanded, the cold iron bell in her hand now feeling like a charged weapon. Elias shook his head, tears streaming down his face. "I don't know the name yet. Mrs. Thorne and the elders finalized the great tally 3 days before Halloween. But I know the formula. And you, Miss Reed, a new, successful arrival with no ties, who shows resistance and intellect. You are a high-value, highly disruptive asset. The carver will be hungry for your potential. You may be the final candidate." He looked at her, his expression a plea for understanding. "They do this to save hundreds of thousands in the entire valley from a blight. It's the only way Oakhaven survives." The air around them grew violently cold again, and the unsettling smell of cinnamon and iron overwhelmed the fresh earth. Evelyn realized their conversation had been overheard, perhaps not by human ears, but by the pact itself. Elias had given her the answers, and now he had put them both in lethal danger. Evelyn now has the name of the entity, the Carver, and a full understanding of the terror. Evelyn fled the cemetery, the heavy ledger tucked against her chest. She had the horrifying name, the Carver, and the full logic of the pact. Her next step was to map the infrastructure. As a historian, she sought truth. As a former urban planner, she sought geometry. Back in the relative security of the Hawthorne House, she pulled up her advanced Geographical Information System (GIS) software on her laptop. She entered the coordinates of the ledger's documented asset transfer locations, using the redacted addresses from her archive printouts. The result was immediate and chilling. The points were not random. They were laid out across Oakhaven with deliberate, impossible precision, forming a vast, interlocking geometric structure. They were precisely positioned at the compass points of the old town square, the four corners of the original Oakhaven settlement. Evelyn realized the town wasn't just located in Oakhaven, the town was the containment system. The four ley lines mentioned in the ledger's astronomical script did not run under Oakhaven, they formed Oakhaven. She began to overlay historical maps with the sacrificial points, tracing the invisible lines of force. The lines formed a massive Maltese cross or a four-pointed star, radiating out from the very center of the town's oldest infrastructure. Her breath hitched as she input the coordinates of the Hawthorne House. The house was not on a ley line, but deliberately set just outside the perimeter of the containment geometry, like a guard post. The pumpkin on the mantelpiece, the iron in the basement, they were designed to anchor the entire structure. Then she located the dead center of the Maltese cross geometry, the precise intersection point of the four ley lines. It led her to the Hawthorne Orchard, the large, neglected patch of land directly adjacent to the house. The house contained the rules. The orchard contained the threat. Evelyn pored over the ledger again, matching the archaic script to the geometry. The astronomical calculations correlated to the lunar cycle, specifically when the potential energy of the Earth beneath the orchard was at its peak. The asset transfers were merely the final act of synergy, transferring life force from the UV assets at the perimeter convergence points to the Carver at the geometric center. She looked out her window at the orchard, now shimmering faintly in the twilight, the trees unnaturally black and still. She noticed something else, a pattern she had missed on her arrival. The apple trees in the Hawthorne orchard were dying in perfect, concentric circles, the decay radiating outward from the absolute geometric center. The Carver was not a monster in a cave. It was an elemental engine of consumption anchored to the physical geometry of the land, feeding on psychic dread and biological potential, and guaranteed to remain dormant only as long as the town rigorously maintained its containment field and provided its annual offering. Evelyn realized the implications of the town's forced Halloween aesthetic. The extreme, month-long display of death, fear, and morbid decay, the pumpkins, the ghosts, the artificial gloom, was not aimed at tourists, it was aimed at the Carver. It was a massive, collective lullaby of entropy telling the entity, "We acknowledge your domain. The season is perpetual. The energy is ready." She had to see the center point. She had to understand the scale of the Carver's influence. Dusk was turning into full night, and the pumpkin lamp in the living room flared with a renewed, cold intensity. Evelyn grabbed her backpack, the ledger, and a high-powered geological survey torch she found in the house's reinforced basement room. She slipped out the back door, heading for the twisted, dark perimeter of the Hawthorne orchard. As she entered the property, she used the iron bell, her key fob, as a makeshift compass. As she moved toward the calculated geometric center, the bell began to vibrate in her hand, growing colder and colder, resisting her movement. She was walking directly into the mouth of the pact. She reached the absolute center point, a small, cleared patch of frozen dark earth where no apple tree had ever grown. The temperature here was sharply cold, painful, and the smell of cinnamon and iron was overpowering. She shone her torch down. Embedded in the dirt, covered in black moss, was a square of granite. On its surface, a hand-carved, ornate symbol was etched, a circle encompassing the Maltese cross geometry. And just below the carving she found four small, meticulously placed iron markers, the precise ley line convergence points. But the most chilling detail was not the geometry itself. It was the presence of a faint, almost invisible residual energy field. Evelyn knew she was standing at the core of the Carver's power, the very point where the life force of the missing families, and the potential of Sarah Bellwether, was to be consumed. Evelyn retreated from the core of the orchard, the cold sweat on her back having nothing to do with the temperature. She hadn't seen a monster, but she had seen the blueprint of the horror, a perfect, interlocking system of fear, ritual, and architecture. The Hawthorne House was a tuning fork and the town was a colossal energy grid. The next morning, Evelyn needed resources. She had to get back to the archive to find the ledger's decryption key, hidden somewhere in the family records, but she couldn't risk the main street. She chose a circuitous route, winding through the residential back lanes of Oakhaven, and ran straight into the Carver's voice. The voice wasn't sound, it was vision. The thousands of pumpkins that decorated every porch, every mailbox, and every lamppost were the town's collective lullaby to the entity. They were also the entity's eyes. As Evelyn walked, she noticed the carvings were no longer static. They were shifting, subtly but undeniably, as if the pulp and rind beneath the skin were being rearranged by an internal pressure. A row of pumpkins carved with simple triangular eyes and jagged smiles along a pristine white fence suddenly looked different. The smiles stretched into grimaces of pain. The triangular eyes narrowed into slits of hostility, tracking her movement as she passed. The flame inside the carved gourds pulsed erratically, casting shadows that seemed to snicker and hiss at her. Evelyn stopped dead. She wasn't hallucinating. This was the entity communicating through its medium. If the town's collective fear fueled the carver, the pumpkins were the amplifiers, broadcasting its mood and its focus. She pulled out her phone and snapped a quick photo of a pumpkin that had warped into a grotesque mask of sheer terror, its mouth stretched impossibly wide. When she looked back at the pumpkin, the face was already shifting, settling back into a conventional, goofy smile. But the image remained on her phone, undeniable proof of the brief, sickening alteration. As she moved closer to the archive, the intensity increased. The carved faces along Elm Street became personalized. One pumpkin on a neighbor's stoop, a man she had seen yesterday politely sweeping leaves, had the man's features, the small, tidy mustache, the anxious brow. But the pumpkin version was howling in silent despair. The carvings were not just registering fear, they were broadcasting Evelyn's status. They were marking her as the instability. She finally reached the back alley behind the archive, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against the hard leather of the ledger tucked in her backpack. She peered into the gloom of the receiving dock, relieved to find it empty. But then she saw it. Propped up against the granite foundation of the archive building, isolated from the other decorations, was a single, small, perfectly carved pumpkin. It was lit from within by the same cold, steady flame as the Hawthorne House lamp. The face carved into the pumpkin was a meticulous, horrifying portrait. Elias. The detail was immaculate, the thin face, the large, terrified eyes, the anxious set of the mouth. But unlike the pumpkin faces that had shifted and settled, this one was fixed in an expression of absolute, visceral panic. The carving was deep, the candlelight flickering through the fine lines of despair etched around its eyes. And the single horrifying change, on the pumpkin's forehead, etched with microscopic precision, was a single bloody mark. It wasn't carving residue. It was fresh. Evelyn knelt, mesmerized by the sheer cruelty of the manifestation. The carver wasn't just influencing pumpkins, it was utilizing them for psychological warfare, telling Evelyn, "We know your ally. We know his fear. And we know exactly where you are going next." The unspoken message was terrifyingly clear. Elias was in immediate danger for what he had revealed, and the carver intended to use that terror to paralyze Evelyn. She couldn't abandon Elias, but approaching the archive now felt like walking into a cage baited with her friend's life. Evelyn realized that the carver's greatest power was not the cold or the darkness, but its ability to exploit human connection and conscience. Evelyn has now received a direct, chilling communication from the entity. The town is closing in. Evelyn ignored the carved pumpkin of Elias. She couldn't save him by running into the archive, and she couldn't save him by cowering. The carver had exposed its strategy: isolate the instability, Evelyn, by attacking her connection, Elias. To fight back, Evelyn needed more than knowledge. She needed authority, the historical authority that only the town's current gatekeeper could reveal. She drove straight to the center of town, to the square where Mrs. Thorne held court. The square was a cacophony of carefully managed chaos, draped in garlands of plastic cobwebs and bathed in the eerie, oscillating glow of dozens of orange floodlights. Mrs. Thorne was overseeing the placement of a towering straw effigy. She was surrounded by 3 other elders, their faces displaying the same unnerving blend of serene dedication and subtle fear. Evelyn strode through the crowd, pulling the heavy packed ledger from her tote bag and placing it on a park bench directly across from the elders. The gesture was a gauntlet thrown. Mrs. Thorne turned slowly, her sweet smile tightening into a thin line of calculated disappointment. "Evelyn dear, you should not have disturbed the ledger. You're making things needlessly difficult for the season." "I know my role, Mrs. Thorne," Evelyn said, her voice steady despite the frantic energy pulsing through the square. "I know the Hawthorne House is the focusing lens and I know the ledger is the account sheet. What I need to know is the formula. Why the Hawthorns? Why my great-aunt? And why the perpetual Halloween?" Mrs. Thorne motioned for the other elders to stand down. She approached the ledger, running a gloved hand over the chilled leather. "The Hawthorne lineage isn't a reward, child. It's a chain. Your family were the only survivors of the Great Tally of 1925 because your great-grandfather was the first to understand the Carver's true nature. It doesn't want chaos, Evelyn. It wants entropy. It seeks the lowest possible energy state," she explained, her voice dropping to a low, chilling cadence. Oakhaven before the pact was volatile. Too much potential, too many people leaving, too much energy wasted. That attracted the Carver. When it first came, it threatened to consume everything, leaving the land utterly barren not just here but across the entire valley. Your ancestors realized that the Carver could be fed, not killed, by providing it with concentrated high-quality doses of what it craved. "And that's human life," Evelyn countered, the ledger's icy presence radiating through the bench. "That's life potential, yes. The people who are selected, the assets, are always the most ambitious, the most talented, the ones planning to leave. Their potential energy, when harvested in a state of controlled despair, guarantees the stability of the rest of Oakhaven. That is the pact. In return for the tithe, the Carver preserves Oakhaven's light, the lush harvests, the beautiful architecture, the perfect, unblemished season." Mrs. Thorne's expression softened into an expression of genuine, tragic pity. "The Hawthorne duty is to be the selector, to maintain the focus. Your great-aunt Clara was a good warden. She kept the town safe. And you, Evelyn, a brilliant historian, a woman of enormous potential, you are the highest UV asset to appear in Oakhaven in decades. The Carver is not threatening Elias, it's offering you a choice." She leaned closer, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper, the smell of cinnamon overpowering. "Elias chose to be a victim the moment he showed fear. He is disposable. But you, my dear, you can assume your rightful place. Accept the legacy. Use the ledger, select the tithe, and guarantee the prosperity of Oakhaven for the next 50 years. It is the only true form of order in a chaotic world." Mrs. Thorne looked at the carved pumpkin faces surrounding them, now all frozen in unnervingly wide, forced smiles. "You are an intellectual. You understand utility. You understand the cost of chaos. Now choose. The warden's duty, or the great tally." Evelyn was left standing alone, the ledger cold beneath her hand. The town had offered her power, the power to decide who lives and dies, and the terrifying philosophical justification for it. Elias was a distraction, a sacrifice the town had already made to force her hand. The true terror was realizing that Mrs. Thorne and the elders were not monsters, but administrators of a cosmic, logical necessity. Evelyn had to find a way to break the logic itself, or be consumed by the duty of her heritage. Evelyn stood in the center of the square, watching Mrs. Thorne and the elders melt back into the crowd. She hadn't chosen. She hadn't screamed. She had simply held the packed ledger, feeling the cold leather bind itself to her palm, and she had survived the moral assault. The town's offer of order was the most chilling thing of all. She returned to the Hawthorne House, the pumpkin lamp on the mantelpiece burning with an aggressive, predatory orange. Evelyn realized her great-aunt Clara must have faced this same choice. A dutiful warden would never leave the ledger unguarded, meaning there had to be a decryption key hidden within the house itself, a silent final testament to her ancestors' struggle. Evelyn stood before the mantelpiece, the physical focus of the Carver's containment. She ran her hands along the polished wood, searching for a seam or a hidden latch. The enormous pumpkin itself rested on a newly constructed section, raised to accommodate its size, as she noted in Chapter 4. Her hand brushed the underside of the mantle's cornice, near the corner where the wall met the chimney flue. There, hidden beneath decades of wax buildup and dust, she felt a small, almost imperceptible button. She pressed it. With a soft click, A small, deep drawer sprang open from the side of the mantelpiece. Inside, nestled on a bed of dried cinnamon bark, the very scent that saturated the house, were two items: a small, tarnished silver compass, its needle spinning wildly, and a brittle, tightly rolled piece of parchment. Evelyn unrolled the parchment. It was not a will or a diary. It was a map, drawn on stiff vellum that felt strangely slick to the touch. The colors were disturbing. The town layout was sketched in fading ink, but the lines of the lay geometry were highlighted in a thick, dried substance that looked and smelled like ochre and old, metallic blood. The map detailed the 4 key points of the Maltese cross geometry she had discovered. But crucially, it contained annotations in her Greytant's precise hand, a final, coded message. One section detailed the UV unit of vitality/potential calculation, confirming Elias's earlier confession. Next to it was a small cipher key, finally unlocking the astronomical calculations in the ledger. They weren't just lunar phases. They were the precise solar and telluric energy vectors needed to sustain the pact's geometry. The most chilling revelation was a dense, bloody annotation near the bottom. Next to the symbol for the iron bell, the key fob, the iron repels the Fae but the bell is the key. Drawn by cinnamon, masking death, deterred by iron, warding magic, anchored by fear, the true fuel. But the carver is bound by the sound of the bell. The heart of the pact must be physically present. The iron bell was not just a symbol, it was a physical artifact of control. Evelyn realized the full extent of the horror. The Hawthorne family had not simply survived the Great Tally. The original warden had been given the ledger, the house, and the duty because they possessed a powerful, inherent psychic sensitivity, a high UV, that made them ideal as wardens and as high-value sacrifice candidates. The only way they could keep the town safe was to perpetually balance the ledger by choosing others. The town did not just want Evelyn to be the warden. The geometry needed her to be the warden, or the system would collapse and take her high UV with it. Evelyn looked at the silver compass. It was a crude magnetometer designed to detect shifts in the local energy fields, the ley lines. The carver was not a demon. It was a hungry, cyclical force of nature anchored to the land's primal energies, and the Hawthorns were its willing jailers and feeders. She now had the complete formula. The ledger provided the names and timing, the GIS mapping provided the location, and the blood-drawn map provided the key to the carver's vulnerabilities. The only thing left was to find Maya, the current asset, before the final desperate act of the pact began. The clock on the wall read October 28th. She had exactly 3 days until the great extinguishment at midnight on Halloween. Evelyn couldn't wait for daylight. The blood-drawn map, with its terrifying ochre lines, pulsed faintly in the darkness of the study, highlighting the Hawthorne orchard like a fresh, open wound. She grabbed the ledger and the crude magnetometer compass, trusting the map more than the house's creeping silence. The orchard was a short walk but felt like crossing a planetary border. The perimeter trees were skeletal, their leaves dried and unnaturally quiet. The ground was cold and silent beneath her boots. As she moved toward the epicenter, the geometric center, the silver compass, previously useless, began to vibrate wildly in her hand, its needle whipping back and forth in frantic resistance to the overwhelming magnetic pull of the ley lines. The iron bell, secured to her belt, hummed with a deep, discordant frequency. She crossed the threshold into the dead zone. The air was not merely cold, it was sterile, devoid of any living scent, no damp earth, no rot, just the sharp metallic tang of cold iron and ash. She reached the granite marker, the compass needle now locked, pointing directly into the ground at the carved Maltese cross. The energy field was visible here, a faint, milky corona rising from the square stone, making the air shimmer and distort the black branches above. The carver didn't attack. It simply surrounded her with its history. The air thickens and a subtle visual effect begins, outlines of people. Not full ghosts, but shimmering distortions in the air, composed of white light and absolute cold. They were the 1925 families, the original Great Tally. Evelyn saw them freezing, confused, performing the final harvested moments of their lives on a constant, silent loop. A mother struggled against a sheet of instant ice clinging to her apron. A child's face, pale and wide-eyed, was pressed against the invisible, smooth wall of the containment field. The terror was palpable but silent. The carver was showing her its initial meal, its glorious efficiency in eliminating a chaotic human element and achieving the harmony recorded in the ledger. This wasn't haunted, it was a data playback of despair, a residual echo of concentrated fear. Evelyn realized the carver consumed life energy, but it didn't process the fear. It stored it as proof of payment. It was a warning and a lure, attempting to condition the new warden to the inevitable. The entity was inviting her to simply watch the process and succumb to the dread, making her eventual UV transfer effortless. Evelyn fought the instinct to recoil, forcing her hands to draw the perimeter of the residual energy field on a notepad, treating the horrific visions as a historical data point to be catalogued. The carver realized the historical display of the 1925 tally was insufficient for the resistant new warden. It switched tactics, recognizing that Evelyn's skepticism masked profound intellectual grief, the kind of high-value despair it truly desired. Evelyn was still in the dead zone when the sensory environment shifted. The overwhelming sterile cold and ash was suddenly replaced by a faint, familiar scent, cheap pipe tobacco and old leather. It was the distinct smell of her long-dead mentor, Dr. Abramson, whose groundbreaking urban planning model she had abandoned after her failure in Chicago 5 years prior. The energy field intensified, coalescing around a new manifestation, a shimmering, transparent projection of the failed Chicago project, presented with crystalline, cold clarity. The scene wasn't one of physical ruin, but intellectual collapse. The moment she let her ambition die, choosing self-preservation over her potential. The carver had analyzed her life and found the perfect emotional weakness. A whisper entered her mind, not a voice but a direct, intrusive thought stream composed of pure, cold logic. You gave up. You wasted your UV. You accepted mediocrity. You are already half-carved. The entity presented her with a horrifying alternate timeline where she succeeded, only to show her how fragile that success was, arguing that the only true order is achieved through the elimination of such chaotic ambition. The psychic assault was overwhelming, a draining force that attempted to pull the UV straight from her mind. Evelyn fought the urge to surrender, her mind battling the carver's premise that order is more important than potential. Her defense was the only chaotic element she possessed, the sound of the iron bell. Gripping the antique key fob, she swung her arm, ringing the iron bell hard against the granite marker. The sound was a shrill, jarring, ugly chaos that had no place in the carver's meticulous order. The entity momentarily recoiled. The illusion of her failure wavered, the spectral cold pulling back a foot. Evelyn seized the window of clarity. She realized the carver wasn't draining her body heat, it was draining her will, feeding on the concentrated energy of her self-doubt. The iron bell, designed by her ancestors, was the one instrument that could disrupt the psychic field. She began mapping the influence field's fluctuations using the magnetometer, confirming that the controlled, contained chaos of the iron bell's sound could temporarily force the carver back into a dormant state. She now had a strategy for survival, but the town was still watching. Evelyn knew the carver would return. She had to find the intended asset, Maya, but she needed a name and a location she couldn't risk pulling from the archive. She decided to use the ledger to force a crack in the town's collective defense mechanism. She spent the afternoon walking through the heart of Oakhaven, the heavy ledger carried openly under her arm, openly confronting random citizens. She started with Jenny Peterson, the baker, whose grandfather was listed as a 1958 asset. Evelyn approached the bakery, the air thick with the cloying sweetness of cinnamon buns. She placed the ledger on the counter, flipping it open to the 1958 entry. Jenny, look at this. Elias Peterson, Sr. It's your grandfather's name. He didn't move south, he was transferred to the Civic Harmony Fund. Jenny's eyes fixed on the archaic script, but her face remained placid, frozen in a sweet, conventional smile. She then tilted her head and looked past Evelyn, her gaze completely vacant. Oh, Elias's grandfather? He moved downstate, dear. Wonderful climate down there for his asthma. The season must be perfect, you know. It ensures the stable prosperity of Oakhaven. Would you like a pumpkin spice latte? The horror was immediate and profound. Jenny didn't lie, she performed a psychological defense. Evelyn approached 3 other citizens whose families were listed in the ledger: the mayor, the librarian, and a local high school teacher. Each one offered the same mechanical, ritualistic denial, repeating phrases about moving on, the Great Migration, or the need for balance. Evelyn realized the town wasn't just secretive, they were psychologically altered. The constant, months-long ritual of Halloween decoration, the pervasive scent of cinnamon, masking the ash and iron of the pact, and the collective, enforced uniformity acted as a form of mass hypnosis and collective amnesia. They actively chose to forget the guilt and the names of the victims every year, restoring the pact's emotional efficiency and keeping their consciousness clean. This amnesia was their true price of survival. She retreated to the archive, finding Elias inside, meticulously shelving. He was wearing the same oversized vest, but his terror had been replaced by the same vacant, forced serenity as the others. He looked at Evelyn, then at the ledger, and his lips curved into a thin, vacant smile. "Miss Reed, you should not disturb the inventory. The season must be perfect." Elias had succumbed. Evelyn was truly alone, trapped within a system of willing participants. It was the night of October 29th. Evelyn, barricaded inside the Hawthorne House, was translating the ledger's celestial calculations using the cipher key when she heard a dry, nervous scrape at the back door. Slipped underneath was a small piece of paper, folded multiple times. The note was written in frantic, barely legible script, the ink bleeding slightly. "Don't accept the duty. The ledger lies. The UV is for you. You are the final UV. It is the most efficient transfer. They are coming for the warden." It was signed with a shaky E. Elias was fighting the amnesia. Evelyn quickly tracked him down to a secluded maintenance alley behind the archive, where he was frantically cleaning a pile of discarded spider webbing. He was manic, his body shivering between obedience and pure terror. "They know," Elias whispered, grabbing her arm with desperate strength. "Mrs. Thorne knows you have the map. She knows your UV is too high to waste on just being a warden. She's accelerating the schedule." He broke down, confirming Mrs. Thorne's offer, Chapter 9, was a lie. The elders were going to sacrifice Maya, but the ultimate prize, the final UV that would secure the pact for generations, was Evelyn herself. Elias explained the true ritual. The town needed a new warden to maintain the focus, but to guarantee permanent safety, the warden herself must be the annual asset. Her inherent psychic sensitivity, UV, made her the ideal subject. They intend to install her as warden and then immediately sacrifice her. "They will compel you to accept the ledger, Miss Reed. The ledger itself will soon compel you to choose the asset, Maya, and record her name. That act is the ceremonial assent to your own duty and your own death." Elias's voice rose to a terrified squeak. "If you refuse to choose, the Carver will wake fully during the Great Extinguishment and consume everyone." He revealed the true meaning of the Hallow Bound Edict's third rule: the offering is due. All accounts must be settled before the final hour of the night. The final hour is the midnight of October 31st. They will use Maya as the final example of the warden's duty, then use Evelyn's high UV to secure the ledger's continuity. Elias clutched her arm one last time, his eyes briefly clearing of the amnesia fog. "They finalize the great tally tomorrow night. You must flee or you must fight. Don't let them make you choose." He stumbled away, lost to the maze of perfect decorations, leaving Evelyn with the horrific knowledge that she was not just an investigator, but the ultimate prize of the pact. The note, the last defiant spark of Elias's true self, was a scalpel of truth against the town's manufactured order. Evelyn didn't just read the words, she felt the chilling logic of her doom. Her high UV was too valuable to be wasted on mere custodianship. She wasn't the warden, she was the final tithe. Evelyn spent the night of October 29th in a frantic, cold sweat, transforming the dining room table into a command center. She spread out the packed ledger, the blood-drawn map, and the magnetometer. She ran the cipher key across the final, unwritten line of the ledger. The archaic script revealed the specific, horrifying criteria for the current year's asset: Maya Vance. Maya Vance. UV 4.9. Destination: disruption. Schedule: midnight. Evelyn realized the ledger wasn't just a record, it was a contractual tool. The act of recording the asset's name with the warden's blood, as hinted at by her Greytant's map, wasn't just naming a victim. It was an act of formal assent to the pact's ongoing terms, a confirmation of the Hawthorne lineage's new sacrifice, Evelyn herself. She ignored the paralyzing moral weight and focused on the physical mechanism of the ritual. The blood-drawn map and the GIS coordinates screamed the final steps. The pact wasn't closed at the orchard core, it was closed at the perimeter. The 4 points of the Maltese cross geometry, the 4 ley line convergence sites she had mapped, housed 4 massive antique pumpkin lamps. These were the only lights in Oakhaven sanctioned to burn after sunset, and they acted as the containment field locks. They maintained the fragile order. Mrs. Thorne's group, the Coven of Elders, would gather at these 4 perimeter points. At the moment of peak telluric energy, precisely midnight, October 31st, they would simultaneously extinguish the lamps. The Great Extinguishment would collapse the field, focusing all the harvested despair from the town's month-long aesthetic and Maya's terror, directly into the Carver's core beneath the orchard. Evelyn glanced at the wall clock. October 30th, 3 a.m. 45 hours remain. She secured the iron bell to a leather cord around her neck. The bell, the heart of the pact, was the only thing capable of disrupting the Carver's psychic focus. She needed to break the ley line circuit by injecting unregulated, chaotic energy into the system. Fire, light, and sound, elements that defy entropy. The final objective was now clear. Save Maya, break the geometry, and destroy the ledger before she is forced to sign her own death warrant. Evelyn packed the ledger and the magnetometer. Her life was now a finite equation, and the variable she had to introduce was total chaos. With the countdown clock ticking, 45 hours remaining, Evelyn's purpose crystallized. She had to locate Maya Vance immediately. Using the decrypted information from the ledger, she found Maya's current address, a modest, perfectly maintained bungalow near the western ley line convergence point. It was a strategically isolated location, designed for minimal disruption. Evelyn found Maya in her home, surrounded by neatly stacked boxes and college application forms for institutions outside of Illinois. Maya was a study in high UV, sharp, driven, and visibly eager to escape. This ambition, Evelyn knew, was Maya's death sentence. "Maya, you need to leave Oakhaven. Now," Evelyn said, foregoing pleasantries, showing her the ledger open to Maya's calculated entry. Maya looked at the ledger, then at the unnervingly earnest historian in her living room and laughed, a sound that felt dangerously chaotic in Oakhaven's air. "Ma'am, that's an antique prop. I know who you are. The new Hawthorne woman. Look, I appreciate the enthusiasm for the season, but I have a scholarship interview tomorrow morning in Chicago. I'm out of here in 36 hours, and I'm not delaying it for a spook show." Evelyn tried to explain the UV, the Carver, and the pact. She pointed to the thousands of grinning pumpkins outside Maya's window. "They aren't decorations, they're emotional containment devices. The town is feeding off your impending fear of disruption." Maya's resistance wasn't disbelief, it was determined denial. She embodied the Oakhaven survival instinct, rejecting any truth that interfered with the town's forced stability. "This town has been good to me, Miss Reed. The festival brought in the money that funded my high school. We trust the elders." Just then Mrs. Thorne arrived, uninvited, bearing a perfect, meticulously carved pumpkin pie. Her gaze swept over Evelyn and the exposed ledger with cold, maternal disapproval. "Oh, Evelyn dear. I didn't realize you were already visiting our asset," Mrs. Thorne cooed, placing the pie on the table. She completely ignored the ledger. "Maya, don't let this woman frighten you. She's simply stressed about her warden's duty. She forgets that our traditions are meant to bring comfort. Your harvest dinner at the church is a great honor, child. It's the final send-off this town gives its brightest." Mrs. Thorne's words were perfectly calibrated psychological wards. They reinforced the town's benevolent lie and invalidated Evelyn's warning as the hysterical ramblings of a failed warden. Evelyn realized the town wasn't just watching Maya, they had her emotionally trapped, linking the sacrifice to honor and civic pride. The escape had to be physical and immediate. Evelyn knew she couldn't convince Maya, she had to kidnap her from the town's suffocating affection. Evelyn waited for nightfall. She returned to Maya's house intending to force the escape, but the town had already responded to Mrs. Thorne's silent signal. Oakhaven was actively sealing itself. Evelyn found the main road out of Maya's neighborhood blocked by a massive, perfectly symmetrical display of pumpkins and corn stalks, disguised as an installation for the harvest parade. The barricade was visually beautiful but physically impassable, reinforced with hay bales and heavy wooden lattice structures. Every alternate route was similarly blocked or funneled into a long, slow traffic loop, constantly monitored by townsfolk in festive but rigid costumes. The carved faces became her surveillance system. As Evelyn drove her hatchback around the back streets, the jack-o'-lanterns were no longer just shifting, they were actively signaling. A row of pumpkins would suddenly flare or dim as she approached a corner, alerting unseen sentinels. She saw a group of uniformed children on bikes, the same unnerving uniforms from Chapter 2, who were not playing but cycling predictable, continuous patrols along the residential perimeter. The entire town had become a labyrinth of containment. Evelyn realized she couldn't drive Maya out. The Carver's geometry was enforced by the town's collective, ritualistic commitment. Frustrated, Evelyn abandoned her car near the town's edge and moved on foot, relying on the magnetometer to sense the weak points in the ley line field. The moment she stepped into the shadows, the pumpkins lining the adjacent fence turned their carved eyes toward her and began to pulsate with a rapid staccato rhythm, a silent alarm. She knew she was being driven inward toward the center of the pact. Evelyn needed a location where Maya would be briefly isolated and accessible. The ledger had pointed to the final ritual site, the church. But why a church for an entity of cold entropy? Evelyn had to find the sanctuary that was truly the trap. Evelyn used the coordinates from her blood-drawn map and her historian's knowledge of the town's founding. She overlaid the Maltese cross geometry onto the oldest map of Oakhaven. The geometric center was the orchard, but the points of entry were specific structures built directly on the ley lines. She found the local church, the Church of the Bound Harvest, at the eastern ley line convergence. It was an ancient stone structure that looked unassuming, covered in plastic spider webbing and fake gravestones for the season. The key was the harvest dinner, the supposed send-off for Maya. Evelyn reasoned that the asset must be held at a place of sacred geometry to stabilize the massive UV transfer before the final great extinguishment. The church, ostensibly a place of divine protection, was, in reality, the most perfectly positioned component of the pact outside of the Hawthorne House itself. Evelyn broke into the church's basement storage room near the altar after midnight, using the cold iron bell to momentarily jam the old magnetic lock. The basement smelled of mildew, old hymnals, and disturbingly fresh cement. In the corner, she found what she was looking for. A reinforced heavy metal hatch set into the stone floor, completely concealed beneath thick, fake cobwebs and hay. The hatch was massive, clearly designed for access to something large and deep. Next to the hatch were 4 small, decorative bronze bowls filled with dried cinnamon and potpourri. Evelyn used the magnetometer on them. They were subtly magnetized, designed to act as psychic dampeners, ensuring the asset's fear and the town's guilt did not interfere with the geometry. The church was the trapped sanctuary. Maya wouldn't be sacrificed in the church, she would be held there, the point of maximum psychic focus on the ley line, until the minute before midnight. Then she would be swiftly transferred to the orchard core via the underground access hatch, ready for the final consumption. The harvest dinner was the town's way of keeping the asset calm, loved, and stationary at the moment of peak energy. Evelyn had to get Maya out of the church, but she was running out of time. The final elders meeting was scheduled for the next night, October 30th. She needed an inside advantage, a diversion. That meant risking the only person left who had shown a flicker of conscience. It was the morning of October 30th. Evelyn tracked Elias to his small, cluttered efficiency apartment above the general store. His door was ajar. He was sitting at his kitchen table, meticulously polishing a row of antique silverware, his eyes completely vacant, consumed by the collective amnesia. Evelyn confronted him directly, slamming the ledger down onto his table. "Elias, I need the plans for the church's subterranean tunnels. You catalog them. You know they're going to sacrifice Maya and then you are next to record my death." The mention of the tunnels seemed to shock the fog from his mind. His eyes widened and he began to shake, fighting the psychological programming of the town. No, I can't. The edict must hold, Miss Reed. If you break the pact, the Carver will take everyone. Not just Maya. Not just you. The entire valley. Elias was a true utilitarian, convinced by Mrs. Thorne's logic. He saw Evelyn as the greater risk, the instability that could doom Oakhaven forever. He stood up, slowly, his movements agonizingly deliberate, showing Evelyn a key hanging around his neck. "I can't let you risk that, Evelyn. The order, the UV calculation demands efficiency. Your potential is too high, too chaotic. You must be contained." He pretended to agree to her plan, telling her they needed supplies from the Hawthorne House basement, the Iron Line chamber, before they moved on the church. Evelyn, desperate and believing his momentary clarity, followed him back. The moment Evelyn was inside the iron-lined room in the basement, Elias acted. He lunged, slamming the heavy wooden door shut and activating the hidden mortar lock. The air was filled with the deafening clunk of the iron bar dropping into place and the cold, acrid smell of cinnamon. Elias spoke through the thick wood, his voice thick with guilt and absolute despair. "I'm sorry, Evelyn. This is the only way to save Oakhaven. You cannot break the geometry. The Carver demands order. And you are the chaos. I have chosen the efficient path. The ledger demands it." He hadn't taken the ledger though. He had deliberately left it resting on a shelf near the barred door, a final, despairing act of defiance. He had condemned her to containment, but he had given her the weapon to fight back. Evelyn was locked in the reinforced, Carver-proof room, fully isolated, with the ledger and the blood-drawn map, less than 24 hours until midnight. The iron-lined room was a terrifying cage. The pervasive scent of cinnamon and iron was suffocating. Evelyn was trapped, betrayed by the last flicker of conscience in Oakhaven. But the containment room was a Hawthorne mechanism, and her family, as smugglers and wardens, had always planned for contingencies. Evelyn retrieved the blood-drawn map. Her great-aunt's meticulous notes didn't just detail the geometry of the pact. They detailed the geometry of escape. The iron room was an inner sanctum, but the iron was there to ward off the Carver, not keep the warden in. The original builders, her ancestors, knew this day might come. The map showed a faint, nearly invisible line leading from the reinforced room. A forgotten smuggler's tunnel used during the 1925 tally to evacuate family members who refused the pact. The entry was hidden behind the thick iron plating. Evelyn grabbed the small, heavy iron bell. The map indicated that the original iron was keyed to the bell's unique frequency. She pressed the flat surface of the bell against the iron wall nearest the floor and struck it with the ledger's silver compass. The sound was not a chime but a deep, resonant throb. The iron plating on the wall shuddered, and a barely visible section of the iron began to pull inward with a groan of displaced stone and rust. Evelyn squeezed into the dark, narrow tunnel, pulling the ledger through behind her. The tunnel was cold and damp, smelling of earth and raw entropy. She moved blindly through the twisting passage, the iron bell around her neck humming louder and louder, acting as a guide and a shield against the creeping cold dread that emanated from the earth around her. The tunnel finally ended at a massive wooden trapdoor. Evelyn heaved it open, emerging into the crisp, black night air of the Hawthorne orchard. The clock on the town hall steeple chimed a single deep, chilling note, 10 p.m. October 30th. She was almost free. But as Evelyn stepped into the orchard, the great extinguishment began early. On the horizon, near the eastern ley line, one of the 4 sanctioned pumpkin lamps abruptly went dark. The orange glow of Oakhaven seemed to dim instantly, swallowed by the sudden influx of deep, consuming blackness from the Carver's awakened domain. The energy field she had mapped in the orchard flared violently, the granite marker pulsating with cold, frantic energy. The town had accelerated the ritual. The final countdown was now. Evelyn grasped the ledger, the weight of a century of horror heavy in her hands. She had less than 2 hours to save Maya, break the geometry, and shatter the pact forever. The instant the first perimeter pumpkin lamp was extinguished, the Carver's breath hit Oakhaven. It wasn't a sudden blizzard, it was a physical, palpable vacuum of energy. The orange-hued light that had defined the town for a month dimmed to a sick, dying ember. The oppressive stillness intensified, drawing the very heat and movement from the air. Evelyn watched from the edge of the orchard as the central dead zone, the Carver's core, began to manifest. The swirling, milky corona she had seen earlier intensified, rising 30 feet into the sky. It wasn't smoke, fire, or cloud. It was a colossal, spiraling vortex of concentrated cold and dread. It was the Carver made visible, pure entropy given geometric form. The vortex began to pull color and sound toward the core. The synthetic cobwebs and paper decorations near the orchard instantly turned brittle and gray, then crumbled. The cheerful, forced music that normally played from the town square was muted to a distant, whining drone. Evelyn looked at her thermal gauge. The ambient temperature in the orchard was dropping impossibly fast, approaching freezing despite the unseasonable warmth of the season. The Carver was awake and it was hungry. Evelyn, clutching the ledger, used the magnetometer. The needle was now useless, pinned violently to the North Pole by the sheer magnetic force emanating from the core. The energy was funneling rapidly into the granite marker. The remaining 3 perimeter pumpkin lamps, the 3 remaining locks, were burning with desperate, frantic intensity, fighting the draining pull. She knew the town was moving. The elders would be rushing to the church to collect Maya, and then proceeding to extinguish the remaining 3 lamps before midnight. As Evelyn moved out of the orchard toward the town center, the Carver manifested a new, active defense. The shadows themselves elongated, twisting into angular, segmented forms, the same geometry she had seen in the fleeting glimpse from the window in Chapter 3. These shadows weren't physical, but their psychic presence was paralyzing, forcing Evelyn to ring the iron bell repeatedly to break the immediate psychic lock. The jarring, chaotic sound was a momentary repellent, forcing the consuming shadows to snap back to their natural state. Evelyn realized the Carver was trying to hurt her. The town's roadblocks and the Carver's shadows were all working in terrifying synergy, pushing her toward one single final location, the Church of the Bound Harvest. The geometry required the asset, Maya, and the warden, Evelyn, to be positioned for the final consumption. The logic of the pact was airtight, and Evelyn was fighting a force that controlled the very structure of the land. Evelyn defied the geometry. She knew the church was a trap, but she couldn't get Maya out under the psychic watch of the Carver. She needed a massive, chaotic diversion, something the entity's cold logic couldn't account for. The Carver thrived on controlled despair and perfect order. Evelyn would introduce unearned, reckless joy. She abandoned the direct route and used the blood-drawn map to find the next key structure on the perimeter, the abandoned town maintenance shed, located near the northern ley line convergence. She smashed the padlock with the iron bell, the metal clanging loudly against the pervasive silence. Inside the shed, she found a massive, unauthorized cache of tourist paraphernalia, the truly excessive waste that the town hid from its own careful economy, including boxes of illegal high-grade holiday fireworks and a rusty, but powerful PA system. Working with frantic speed, Evelyn connected the PA system to a speaker array aimed toward the town square. She rummaged through her backpack for her phone and found the last track she'd listened to in Chicago. A loud, chaotic, bass-heavy electronic dance song that sounded completely alien to Oakhaven's Gothic gloom. The moment the music blasted through the array, a sudden, joyful, abrasive WWW, the entire town seemed to physically flinch. The sound was an assault on the Carver's order. The pumpkin faces surrounding the shed instantly warped, no longer displaying fear, but a grotesque, strained confusion, their pulp liquefying slightly under the sonic pressure. Evelyn ignited the first rack of fireworks, unregulated, intensely colored explosives that shot into the dark sky, bursting in brilliant, chaotic, non-geometric patterns. The light was pure, uncontrolled photon energy, violently opposed to the Carver's monochromatic cold. The effect was immediate. The Carver's vortex over the orchard shivered. The psychic dread that had been pressing down on the town momentarily receded, replaced by sensory overload. The pumpkins across the square, overloaded by the sudden contradictory energy input, began to short-circuit, their carved eyes blinking erratically before some exploded in sprays of steaming pulp. Evelyn had successfully introduced a virus of joy into the Pact's operating system. The town's collective amnesia fractured, the forced performance momentarily collapsing as residents stopped their frantic preparations and looked up, blinking at the chaotic beauty. The Carver was momentarily stunned by the sheer, unbridled waste of energy. Evelyn raced through the chaos she had created, the loud, joyful music masking her movements. She reached the Church of the Bound Harvest, now lit by the erratic flash of the distant fireworks. The church, the trapped sanctuary, was in a state of muted panic. She slipped into the basement near the altar, the bronze psychic dampeners now humming uselessly. Mrs. Thorne, Jenny Peterson, and a third elder were standing over the exposed metal hatch, preparing to hoist Maya down. Maya Vance was still catatonic, her UV being psychically pre-harvested by the converging ley lines. "Stop!" Evelyn yelled, ringing the iron bell with all her strength. The harsh, jarring throb shattered the remaining elder's focus. Mrs. Thorne spun around, her sweet facade gone, replaced by a mask of ancient fury. "You fool! You've ruined the balance!" Mrs. Thorne screamed, her voice deep and unnatural. "The Carver will demand a greater payment. You are forcing the great tally to consume Oakhaven." Just then, the outer door of the basement burst open, and Elias stumbled down the stone steps. He was frostbitten, his clothes covered in dark earth and ash. His eyes, however, held a terrifying new clarity, the clarity of a man who has accepted his fate, embracing the utilitarianism he previously fought. "It's the only way, Evelyn. I saw it." Elias choked out, clutching a piece of smoldering iron-infused wood from the orchard. "Maya is a minimal sacrifice. But the Carver demands the Warden's potential to reset the pact. I am the only one who can fill the role cleanly." He had returned to the dead zone, attempting to perform the final duty. He was carrying a torch, not to light the way but to burn the ledger at the core, the sacrificial act he believed was necessary. But he needed the ledger Evelyn still held. Elias saw Evelyn, the ledger, and the open hatch, and lunged toward the core of the ritual. This was the moment of the desperate sacrifice. He was attempting to choose his death over the death of the town and his sister. Evelyn fought Elias, not Mrs. Thorne. She tackled him, wresting the smoldering torch from his hand. Elias, driven by the cold logic of duty, fought with manic strength. "Let me go. It's the highest efficiency. The ledger demands it." "The ledger lies." Evelyn screamed back, finally hitting him with the truth. "The ledger demands my death, Elias. You're just a distraction. You are choosing the Carver's logic over humanity." She rang the iron bell directly in his face. The sound broke his concentration, forcing him to collapse. With Elias subdued and Maya still in a deep trance, Evelyn turned the torch on the bronze psychic bowls. The cinnamon and herbs ignited in a furious chemical explosion, driving Mrs. Thorne and the remaining elders back. Evelyn used the diversion, grabbing Maya and Elias, and descending into the freshly cemented subterranean tunnels beneath the hatch. They disappeared into the darkness just as the second perimeter pumpkin lamp winked out, plunging that section of the church into absolute blackness. Evelyn raced through the cold, damp smuggler's tunnel, Maya unconscious in her arms and Elias staggering behind her, still half paralyzed by the Carver's psychic drain. The booming electronic music from the town square and the distant chaotic blasts of fireworks were her only guidance, and her only protection. The tunnel spat them out directly into the black, skeletal stillness of the Hawthorne orchard core. 11:45 p.m. The Carver's vortex was immense now, a swirling pillar of black cold consuming the night sky above the granite marker. The air pressure was crushing, and the sense of absolute, crushing futility was paralyzing. 2 perimeter lamps remained, flickering rapidly, fighting a losing battle against the encroaching darkness. The Carver's full, colossal hunger was unleashed. Evelyn knew this was the final confrontation. The Carver was not defeated by light or sound, but by the destruction of its contractual obligation. She pushed Maya and Elias behind the protection of the largest dead apple tree. She walked directly into the center of the dead zone, holding the packed ledger aloft like a shield. The ledger began to shake violently, radiating absolute cold, its archaic script shimmering with internal light. The Carver had accepted the ledger as the physical representation of the pact. The Carver communicated psychically, a deafening, soundless scream in Evelyn's mind. "The Warden is bound. Deliver the balance. Order must be restored." "No order." Evelyn roared, her voice thin but sharp. "The ledger is corrupt. The UV calculation is void." She began tearing pages from the massive book, ripping the names, the dates, and the astronomical formulas, the lifeblood of the Carver's logic. The Carver responded with an unholy shriek of pure, psychic agony. The vortex above contracted and expanded rapidly, trying to lash out. Evelyn felt a searing, painful cold carve deep, geometric patterns onto her face, a psychic attack mirroring the pumpkin faces of Chapter 8. The Carver was literally trying to carve her into the new, consumed asset. With a final, desperate surge of will, Evelyn used the torch she still carried to ignite the torn pages. She dropped the burning pile onto the granite marker, pushing the entire smoldering ledger into the crack in the basement floor, the Carver's pressure valve. The fire, chaotic, unplanned, and consuming the very logic of its food supply, was the ultimate violation. The ancient leather pact, fueled by the cinnamon-soaked wood of the pedestal, burned fiercely. The Carver let out one last, colossal, silent scream of pure, overwhelming defeat. The vortex above the orchard did not dissipate. It shattered, fragmenting into millions of tiny, cold, black dust motes that rained down onto the land. The entity was not killed, it was overloaded, its complex, centralized consciousness violently shattered by the destruction of its own contract. The edict was broken. The ritual was shattered. The town clock chimed midnight, October 31st. The great extinguishment was complete, but the final required tithe was never made. The moment the clock struck, the chaos stopped. The pulsating music cut out. The fireworks faded. The fragmented dust of the Carver settled, covering the entire town in a fine layer of metallic ash and absolute silence. The remaining 2 perimeter pumpkin lamps flickered violently and then died, the field collapsing not due to ritual, but due to system failure. Evelyn, scorched psychically but alive, pulled Maya and Elias back through the orchard. Maya stirred, her eyes wide, the catatonic despair replaced by confusion and the immediate, powerful urge to flee. Elias was physically broken but mentally free, the cold logic of the pact finally lifted from his conscience. The aftermath was subtle, terrible, and permanent. The town had been saved from consumption, but not from the consequences of interference. The elders, including Mrs. Thorne, were found later, frozen in place around the collapsed church hatch. They were not dead, but catatonic, victims of the final, massive psychic backlash, their minds overloaded by the Carvers' fragmented agony. The town's memory was utterly shattered, the collective amnesia replaced by a collective, terrified blank slate. Evelyn drove out of Oakhaven before dawn, the freed Maya in the passenger seat, already planning her escape to Chicago, and a broken Elias huddled in the back. As they passed the town sign, Evelyn looked in the rearview mirror. Oakhaven was perfectly preserved, eternally decorated, but the festive glow was gone, replaced by a permanent, eerie stillness. The pumpkins still grinned, but their faces were fixed in the haphazard, terrified grimaces of the Carvers' last communication. The light was now a dim, constant, sickly orange. The final price of breaking the pact was perpetual Halloween. The Carver was not destroyed, it was dispersed, fragmented into the very ley lines and soil of Oakhaven. The town survived, its prosperity intact, a dark testament to the pact's success, but the entity's logic now governed the landscape itself. Oakhaven was forever stuck in the aesthetic and cold dread of October 31st, the perpetual loop of the season, bent by Evelyn's chaos, but never truly broken. Evelyn, the last Hawthorne warden, carried the scars, the geometric coldness etched onto her face, and the knowledge that she hadn't ended.